Well, hello there, all you lovely people. Professor Gray here with the final module for unit number 4 of the course, the module of the unit on utilitarianism and its limits. So, of course, that means the unit 4 exam is due this weekend. As usual, I'll post a video going over the problems with you all. So more on that later. We'll save that for after this module. Just right now, we want to wrap up unit number 4, wrap up today's module. And so just recall again, this unit is on utilitarianism and its limits. And we've been talking a lot now about utilitarianism, utilitarianism as the ethical theory that is particularly concerned with the promotion of the greater good. The idea that we measure overall goodness for everyone. And we do that by aggregating up, the individual good for everyone involved. And we just aggregate it all together. And that's the overall, the overall good for the group. And of course, we've seen a nice dialectic throughout this unit now where, criticisms are made of utilitarianism. We critique hedonism. John Stuart Mill says, okay, we'll have something better than hedonism. And then we critique things like sum ranking or consequentialism. And John Stuart Mill says, no, I can give you justice. I can give you rights. And so this nice back and forth between critics of utilitarianism and someone like John Stuart Mill who wants to defend. Sorry, I got hair everywhere. Anyway. So anyway, this unit has been largely about normative ethics. I haven't mentioned that in a while. Normative ethics, recall, is about stating and defending basic moral principles. And indeed, in the last module, I showed you a little chart with different types of theories there on it. And I think this chart shows us a pretty fundamental disagreement in normative ethics, because there's teleology, which says that morality is only about the goodness of outcomes. But then we have deontology that says, no, morality is concerned with things other than the goodness of outcomes. And those other things that deontology talks about often come in the form of constraints. And we've talked a lot about that constraint against harm as being a clear candidate for a constraint on action. Now, of course, looking at the chart, we see that teleologists, they disagree about, the goodness of outcomes for whom. You got the ethical egoists saying it's only the goodness of outcomes for you, while we have then the consequentialists who say, no, it's the goodness of outcomes for everyone involved. But again, if you're an ethical egoist or if you're a consequentialist, you still agree that morality is only about the goodness of outcomes. It's about impact. The consequences. It's not about your intentions. It's not about your motivations or anything like that. It's just the outcome of your actions. And as the chart also shows, deontologists can disagree about how, constraints work. You can be an absolute deontologist who says constraints may never, ever be violated. That's the absolute kind. Or you could be a more moderate deontologist who thinks that constraints have thresholds or tipping points where they can then be violated. But again, all deontologists agree there are constraints on action that limit, what you can do. How can you promote the good or whatever else you want to do? Deontology agrees limits must be set. But again, I'm just kind of there's all these cool now debates we're starting to see. That's why I like this unit. We really start to see now all these different debates. If you like consequentialism, lots of ways to be a consequentialist. You like teleology, lots of ways to be a teleologist. And now we've started to introduce this idea, which will continue into the next unit, this idea of deontology and what that looks like. Maybe you like this idea of constraints and rights having more, force than just, security or the goodness of outcomes or whatever. Anyhow, in this module, we are going to take a little visit into meta-ethics. We haven't done meta-ethics. Do you remember what it is? I know it's been so long. Recall meta-ethics focuses on analyzing what claims in ethics mean and how these claims in ethics are justified. Again, what do ethical claims mean? How are they justified? And the meta-ethical concern in this module is about moral dilemmas. Now, if you jump to the text, page 160, Michael Walzer, his little article there, right on the first page, you see him define a moral dilemma. He says there, a moral dilemma is a situation where a person must choose between two courses of action, both of which it would be wrong for them to undertake. Yes, so a moral dilemma, according to Michael Walzer there, is something where no matter what you choose, you've done something morally wrong. That's a moral dilemma. Now, it's worth emphasizing that a moral dilemma is a pretty unique sort of thing. So I'll just distinguish it from some other types of maybe dilemmas you might think of or decisions, because a moral dilemma is different from what we might call a valenced choice, choice. If you're a psychology student, you might have heard this word valenced thrown around. It's used to refer to strong emotions, whether those emotions are positive, that's positive valenced, or negative, emotions that are negative valenced. But valence choice here, what I mean is I'm just referring to choices or decisions that have strong emotions involved with them. And so, for instance, when Jen and I had to euthanize our cat Pumpkin, I've mentioned that in a few videos ago, that was an extremely emotional decision for both of us in making that decision to euthanize Pumpkin. But this wasn't a moral dilemma. We knew what we had to do. We knew it would have been cruel and fundamentally wrong to, not to make Pumpkin live longer than she had to, but that still, it was a very obviously a very emotional decision for us, one that still resonates with us, even if it's in small ways today. But so that's a valence choice, just strong emotions involved for sure. And so those choices matter, but that's not really a moral dilemma. And it's also useful to distinguish moral dilemmas from what we might call hard choices. And hard choices are just the ones where you feel like, you have all these commitments and you feel like you can't satisfy them all, where, you're going to have to give something up. But a hard choice is where you do feel also that if you just had enough time to sit and think, you could come up with a solution that satisfied all those constraints. You just might not have that time. But in a hard choice, you do feel like, no, it is possible to satisfy all your commitments. It's just, you need time to think about, think it through, how you'll do it. So for instance, just suppose I agree to pick you up at the airport. That's a very nice thing for me to do, by the way. I hope you're very nice and happy about that. So I'm picking you up at the airport. But as I'm ready to go to get you, my wife, Jen, she falls and hurts herself and needs me to take her to the hospital because I'm the only person around. So now I have conflicting obligations. On the one hand, I have my obligation to you because I promised to pick you up. But of course, obviously, I have an obligation to my wife to help her as well. And so now this might be a hard choice just simply because in that moment, I feel like, crap, I can't, do all the obligations that I want to do. I'm going to have to be, feels like I have to be the bad guy and sorry, I'm going to ditch you. I'm going to take my wife to the hospital. But still, I'll feel bad for that, right? But the idea is that if this is probably just a hard choice, because if I really had a few moments to think, I could probably find a solution. For instance, I could just call someone I know and be like, oh, hey, could you pick up a student of mine at the airport? And, you get picked up as you needed. I discharged that obligation, but also then I can take my wife to the hospital. And so everyone's happy. So that's the idea. A hard choice means it feels like there's a conflict going on there, but there might be a way, you feel like there's a way you could resolve it. It's just, you just need time. Maybe a lot of time, but some time. Now, moral dilemmas are different. Yes, moral dilemmas might involve lots of emotion, and moral dilemmas certainly involve conflict. But the idea of what makes a moral dilemma is a situation where the choice itself is just such that there is no possible way, literally no possible way to satisfy all your obligations, all your commitments for whatever reason. You think, I can think about all this I want, but there's literally nothing I can do in this situation that's going to be win-win or make everyone happy. No, I'm going to have to violate a commitment no matter what that's what Walzer is talking about. No matter what you do in that situation, you're going to do something wrong. And there's no amount of thinking about it that will solve that. We'll find a way through. So by their very nature, moral dilemmas cannot be solved. No matter what you do, you are going to do something wrong. And indeed, this idea, some of you might have thought of this already. Bonus, I wish I could reward you if you had, was absolute deontology. Remember absolute deontology says there are constraints on your actions that you always have to, obey. There's just certain things you can never, ever do. But the problem, remember, constraints reduce your options. Constraints get rid of the bad stuff. And then you choose from what's left. But what if your constraints eliminate everything? You have nothing left. You use your constraints and then now you're left with literally nothing to, the empty set. There's nothing to choose from. And suppose, for instance, I'll be the absolute deontologist. Professor Gray accepts two absolute constraints. One, an absolute constraint against harm. Two, an absolute constraint against telling lies. Some of you probably have guessed this and know where this is going. It's because I'm going to give you a very classic now moral dilemma for absolute deontology. It runs like this. Suppose you're in Nazi-occupied France during World War II, and I'm hiding a Jewish family in my basement, trying to keep them safe. But then the Nazi troops or the French, what were they called? The Vichy government comes in, knock on my door and say, are there any Jewish people inside? Now, my options are, I can tell the truth and everyone in the guards come in and take the Jewish family away. And so they all die in a camp somewhere. That's so much for telling the truth. Or I could tell a lie and keep that Jewish family safe, at least for now. But of course, I just told you I accept constraints and both my options are then eliminated, right? Because if I lie, I'm violating the constraint against lying. And if I tell the truth, it looks like I'm violating the constraint against harm because they're going to die. And so that's a genuine moral dilemma because my constraints eliminate everything. And so therefore, no matter what I choose in that situation, I've done something wrong. No matter what I choose in that situation, I have violated a constraint. And so that's a classic problem with absolute deontology. People try to figure those things out. We'll probably see it again when we do some, in the next unit. So I won't go any further on that. But I'll just note that is a meta-ethical concern. Back to old meta-ethics here, because we're really deeply now reflecting on the nature of our moral claims. That is, should our moral claims allow there to be moral dilemmas and conflicts? That, as I just said, because again, a moral conflict says, in principle, no amount of thinking is going to solve this. You're just stuck in a situation where no matter what you do something morally wrong. And a lot of philosophers who study metaethics are concerned if morality allows that to happen. That if morality allows that you could be in a situation where everything you do is wrong. And so that's absolutely a huge challenge for absolutist deontology. That's actually a reason why some people don't like that absolutist approach. Because again, what do you do when these things conflict? But notice, this is often then used as a reason why utilitarianism is the bee's knees, because a utilitarian just puts it in a table and does the math, right? And determines the overall goodness of outcomes and decides that way. So yeah, if we go back to the example I gave, a utilitarian will look at when the Nazi knocks on my door, of course I tell a lie. That's completely whatever harm the lie does, it's completely outweighed by the lives saved in that situation. There is no dilemma here. Case closed. I don't even have to think twice. Lie done. And a lot of people are like, okay, yeah, utilitarianism, no moral dilemmas. That sounds pretty good. Well, we know there's other problems with utilitarianism, but look, some people are like, hey, at least no conflicts ever. There's no such thing as a moral conflict for a utilitarian because they do the math and the math gives them the answer. Always. It might be a hard choice for a utilitarian because they have to do the math, and that math might take a lot of time to figure out what to do. But at the end of the day, the math can, in principle, be done. There's no moral dilemma. At worst, it's a hard choice that can be solved eventually. So yes, I'm very interested. I love this stuff. You can tell I'm getting excited. Metaethics, it's cool. And I love my dissertation was about moral dilemmas, so I get excited. Anyway. But what's even more cooler now is that this isn't just that moral dilemmas are not just an issue for metaethics. Go to page, 161. Go to page 161 of Michael Walzer's article. Now, if you look there, you see Walzer does say, and I love this, The argument, again, about moral dilemmas relates not only to the coherence and harmony of the moral universe, right? That's metaethics, the harmony of the moral universe, but it also relates to the relative ease or impossibility of living a moral life. It is not, therefore, merely a philosopher's question. Oh, I love it. I'm sorry. I'm in a good mood today, I guess. Why? I don't know. It's my wife's birthday. Maybe that's why. Anyway, what Walzer is doing here with that quote I just read, he's saying that moral dilemmas will have an impact on applied ethics. Oh, there's something else we haven't seen for a while. Applied ethics. Recall it, applied ethics has us ask what should be done in this specific case or on this specific issue. And so for this article by Michael Walzer, the specific issue he's trying to explore is the idea of moral dilemmas and the impact they have on political leadership, a very concrete thing. You know, we have leaders, political leaders, right? And he thinks moral dilemmas are something that Walzer thinks, is inherent to being a political leader or being a politician, he says. And so that's what we're going to talk about in the rest of this module. So we'll begin this module. The first thing we'll do is look at this moral dilemma Walzer thinks all political leaders must face. That's the problem of dirty hands. Second, we'll see how this problem of dirty hands appears in this example of torture. And third and finally, we'll look at what Walzer says a political leader should do when dealing with dirty hands. So that's the module. Excited? No? Oh, well, I am. So there, I'm excited. Person who may or may not be watching me. But first, let's take our first quick break, and then we can come on back and jump right in.